Hello, I'm Christine Reed, and today I'm going to take you through what paint is. Paint is quite obviously something colourful that you stick onto paint, onto paper, onto canvas, onto walls. At the earliest level, it was something that you found in prehistoric times easy to hand. So it might be ochre from the ground, muddy, red, yellow, orange, white. It might be charcoal from fires. And you can smear that onto the wall and you can make drawings with it. And we all do as children. But you often need something to make it stick to the wall. So you can use water, but you might want to make it stick more permanently. So animal fat, glue, sap, the glue that you find from trees, you've often find that the sap is quite sticky. You can mix that with a powdery substance and make paint. So that's at its simplest level. Now I'm going to show you, I'm going to take you through paint, the different types of paint briefly, and I'm going to show you a bit of paint on the paper. So I'm going to now take you through. So it's pigment mixed with a binder to give it some structure. And that structure can be at different viscosities. So you might have a really watery paint, water paint, for instance, or you might have quite a thick paint that sort of sits up and sticks to the canvas or the page like a lump, which is impasto style. Now, you can go to places. This is in France, in Paris, opposite the Louvre. It's a famous old shop called Senelia. And they have the pigments in jars. You can buy the dry pigments, but you can also buy them already prepared in lots of different ways. So you've got pigments in crayons, you've got pigments in paint, you've got pigments in pastels, and so on. So, and the pigments come from the natural ochres that I mentioned before. They come from rocks. So the blues, the brilliant blues, come from lapis lazuli from Afghanistan. They come from insects. A bright red cochineal comes from the cochineal insect, which is actually farmed on prickly pear. You have chemicals these days. Of course, many of the pigments we use nowadays are perhaps safer than they were in the old days. So many of the reds, for instance, came from mercury and other toxic compounds. And now you can get them made in a safer way. So we've got a huge variety these days. Now the binding mediums are different for the different types of paint. So with watercolours, including gouache, you have gum arabic, which comes from trees, it's natural. And this painting that I have done is basically, this one is acrylic. So you've got acrylics, which are made with a polymer emulsion. I don't know that you can actually see it on this paper, but acrylic paints have a slightly plasticky look because they are basically a plastic, and they're slightly shiny. Now, some of these lines are not acrylic, so that is ink. And ink is also basically a pigment with a binder, a watery binder. And then with oils, obviously you have oils in it, and one of them is linseed oil. You can use other oils. Now, in the early days, they used egg tempera. So that was a kind of mixture of eggs, which will make a binder, and it was used principally on religious paintings like this. So on board or on plaster, often the plaster, they used it while the plaster was wet, and it actually kind of goes into the plaster, becomes one with the wall. So anyway, in terms of the binding medium, they do give paint its consistency and its working properties. So with watercolour, they are transparent and very easy flowing, just like water. And it can be reconstituted. So watercolours are not set. If you drop water on them after they've dried, you can make them watery again, and you can actually take that colour off. So you need to be careful, and generally watercolours need to be behind glass or sealed in some way so that they don't get damaged. Gouache is also a watercolour, but it's got some added chalk in it, and so that gives it an opaque finish. It makes it more solid than watercolour, and it's matte, so it's not shiny. Acrylics, as I said before, are fast drying. Well, they're fast drying, and they're plastic paints. Now there are a lot of different mediums that you can use with acrylics, and people do get confused there. But you can have an acrylic working like a watercolour, where it's very, very watery, all the way up to something very thick and impasto, like an oil paint that will sit on its own. And so whatever type of acrylic paint you have, you can actually buy a medium which you can mix with them and turn them into a different type of viscosity, which I'll explain to you. And then the oil paints are very slow drying. So these are fast drying, and people do sometimes find it difficult to work with acrylic paints because of that fast drying property. And you can buy mediums that will retard that drying so that they'll last wet for longer. And one of the beauties of oil painting is that you can use them and manipulate them over quite a long period of time. And you can make many layers. You can, of course, layer acrylic paints too, because they're generally speaking not, unless you use them like watercolours, they're generally opaque, so you can paint over. And they don't reconstitute, so they're not like watercolours. So once it's dry, you put water on it, it's fixed. Now, here are some of the things that I use. You can see what a messy person I am in painting. This is a little set of coloured watercolours and gouache that I have, and I take with me when I'm travelling, and I mix them on the palette. This is gouache here. I usually have a big tube of white gouache because I like to be able to paint over, and white gouache is nice and opaque, and I can paint over. If you are a traditional watercolourist, you do need to be careful to leave the white paper showing, and not put paint on that area where you want the whites to be. So it's quite a technique, and I don't claim to be a watercolourist myself. I mostly use gouache, but I do have watercolours. Daniel Smith is a good name for watercolour. Generally speaking, try and buy a good name brand, because they have a better pigment load in general than the student quality paints. Now you can add extra binders to your watercolours and make them into gouache. So this will actually make a more transparent paint, a watercolour, into a thicker, more opaque paint. This is a painting not done by me, done by one of my friends in watercolour, and you get that sense here of the transparency of the paint, which gives it a lovely fresh quality. And here you can see the transparency. And the white has been left, and she's just painted in a bit of grey to give you the sense of the bottle. Now this is one of my travel diary paintings. So when I travel, I do quick paintings, and this is gouache with ink as well to give some definition. So you can see just how opaque that is in comparison to the watercolour. This is a selection of some of my acrylic paints. Here are some very good names. So there are some very good quality paints. Now, this one is called Structure. So it's one of the paints that is quite thick, the thick end of the range. And I like to use thick paint when I'm painting with acrylics, or indeed when I'm painting with oils. Now, these are some of the mediums that you can add to those paints. So you can use a heavy gel. This is a glossy one, but you can get them in satin and matte. And that'll make your paint thicker. So if you have a very loose paint, a very flowing paint, and you want to make it thicker, you can add a gel, a heavy gel. This is a glazing liquid, a satin glazing liquid. Now, when you're using acrylics, if you are always using water, you're diluting the pigment load. So if you need to keep that colour, you're better off using a clear painting medium to add to your paint, because it won't dilute the pigment in the same way that water does. So this is a good thing to know about and to use. This is an unlocking formula. So if you are painting with acrylics and you've painted something that you want to get rid of, if it's still within a certain period of time, you can use this to take the paint off. The acrylic, the glazing liquid will give a very fine layer. So you can layer your paint and get a sense that there's some depth to the paint by putting in lots of different layers. And so you can get the heavy body, as I mentioned. You can get medium viscosity, which is basically what this one is. And you can get the open ones, which are the slow drying ones. And you can get inks, which are very watery. They dry fast and they're waterproof. And they're very strong pigment. Here are some acrylic inks. As I said, the fluid is like milk. They're very good for using with mixed media, and you can get them in all colours now. This is an acrylic painting of mine, painted with Structure acrylics, and I don't know if you can really see it here, but you can see the brush strokes because I do it in an impasto style. It's certainly not, I would call it, it's not painted in a style where you can't see the brush strokes, because I actually like that kind of chunkiness. Here are some oil paints, again, some good brands here, and these are pigments combined with what we call drying oils, because you don't want something that's going to stay wet forever. So linseed oil, poppy and walnut oils can be used. Mostly we seem to use linseed, but they dry slowly, so they can be worked over time, as I said before. Now, again, you can get oil mediums. So you could buy the dry pigment and mix it with a medium yourself, but we generally these days buy paint in tubes or in tubs. And so you can buy, these are some of mine, you can see that they're getting fairly ancient, some of them, but you can get additional linseed oil to make the paint runnier, and that's fairly fatty. And then you can get these different mediums, which are a lean medium is a less fatty one and it dries faster. And this is a solvent, which is it's, you know, you can use terps, but terps smell and some people are very allergic to them. So this is a solvent that doesn't have a smell and is kinder. And this is the last one in this PowerPoint. This is one of my oil paintings. You can see the richness of the colours with oil, and that's one of the things that people do comment on, that they prefer oils because of the jewel-like quality of the colours. Now, acrylics have come a long way, and they certainly have improved over time, and you can get fabulous colours with them too, but there are some people who would always prefer to use oil paints. So that's it for that, and here we are. And I thought I would just show you some of the the different qualities of the paint. So here I have a free flow. So this is an Atelier paint, and you can see when I drop it that it is quite loose. Now here I have an ink, again Atelier, and you'll see that it is even more flowing than what I just showed you. So it's just like water, but very strong colour. Now I'm just going to get you some others. We have here maybe a couple of colours. So this is structure paint, and you'll be able to see that this is much thicker. So I'm just going to put this on here, and you can see that it doesn't drip out, and it's quite thick. Yep. Okay. Now I will show you. So this is you can get all sorts of specialty paints now. You can get paints that sparkle and paints that look like gold and silver and pewter. So there's a lot of variety, and you can get them in all the different types of paint. But this one is an acrylic. It's a fluid, a free fluid acrylic, and I'm going to just show you how I might use this. So you can see that this is quite free flowing, and it makes rather a nice golden, rather a nice little golden pool there. So I'll get a brush. Now I have something behind me. So this is something where you can use something just a little bit different that can just make a painting. And what I'm going to do, so this painting is just on paper. It's a mixed media piece. This is structure acrylic. It's got some watercolour crayon on it. It's got some watercolour on it. It's got other bits of crayon. It's got some ink, some pen and ink. And I have drawn a circle using a plate, a circular plate. And what I'm going to do is use the gold paint to paint in a sun. I like to sometimes paint this sort of thing just for fun and just to do something just a little bit different from a traditional painting. Now you can see that although this is quite fluid, it's also got quite a lot of body to it. So, and you can use your brush to just make it quite thick. And you can possibly see that there are some thick lines of paint in there, and I'm not going to paint over them to make them all flat because I quite like that effect. It's a bit like it's beaten. You know how metal is beaten, so you can, and that it'll catch the light. So here we go. And sometimes if you've got a painting that's just, you know, it's okay, but it needs a bit of dressing up. Some of these rather fun, exciting new paints can make all the difference. So you just carefully, people often ask me about whether I do the background first, and yes, sometimes I do, but sometimes I like to do this sort of effect where I've painted and then I'll think about it and come back in later and go, I think I'll put a sun there. I think that'll be fun. So you can just add to it and sort of paint around what you've already got. So there are people do worry about whether there are rules that they've got to follow when they paint. I have to say that I'm a great breaker of painting rules, and I just enjoy making up my own rules, really. And, you know, art and painting is all about expressing yourself. You don't have to meet anybody's needs, except I suppose if you're doing a commission, you need to meet a client's needs, but most of the time you can do just what you want for yourself. So you see, we're getting, and I'm not adding water to this because it's already pretty, I mean, I've got a wet brush. I make sure the brush is wet. And then because this paint is pretty free flowing, I don't really need to add water to it. I might every so often. But it's better to have it on thick so that you get a really good coverage. So I'll just fill in all these little bits here. I hope you can see that that is developing. And it may be that I decide later that I want to colour this bit in too. Don't know yet. I need to see what it looks like when I've finished putting the sun in. Sometimes less is more. Sometimes more is better. Just depends. People often say to me, when do I stop? And I've gone over the line there. I'll just scrape that out a bit. Yeah, when do I stop? Well, that's really always a hard question because people overdo it. And many of my students say, nah, my problem is that I always keep going and then I overdo it. And so you need to learn to step back. Now, I did this as a demonstration originally, and I just put the leaves in, and then I put in some more leaves, and then I put in these wavy things. But that's happened over a period of about 3 weeks because it wasn't a work that I was specifically working on. But over a period of a few weeks, I thought, well, you know what, this isn't too bad. I'm just going to keep working on it. Now I'm going to paint over that bit of blue there because I don't really need that bit. I think that's starting to look quite interesting. But I may, as I say, I may do more later because sometimes more is more. So we'll just fill that little bit in. There we are. Some leaves, some sort of landscape, and a golden sun. So there you are. I hope that you found that useful and interesting. And, you know, go out and try some different paints. You can play with all the paints that you have. And even if you haven't got expensive paints, just keep painting because the more you do, the better you're going to get. Okay, I'll talk to you in the next tips and tutorial lesson. And if you want to see my work or follow me or look at what workshops I've got available, please go to christinereadart.com, and read is spelled R-E-A-D. Okay, great. Bye.